Good evening, everyone. My name is Mark Bessire. I'm the Judy and Leonard Lauder Director of the Portland Museum of Art. Thank you all so much for joining us tonight for the Spring 2021 Digital Program Series. Museums today are at a moment of reckoning. Immense social, political, and financial pressure is testing the foundations of institutions, prompting examination of history, the need for change, and the process to acknowledge, to repair, and to heal. This spring, the Maine Art Museum Trail is proud to present a digital program series that explores the notion of making home, making a home, and what that means for institutions and the communities they exist within, bringing to light the stories that have not been told and reflect on the changing museum field. Conversations are hosted on Zoom and have been free of charge, and we thank the Portland Press Herald as our media sponsor. Tonight, we have a conversation with the Maine Art Museum Trail directors, and I'm so happy to be joined by Christopher J. Brownawell, Director, Farnsworth Art Museum, George Kinghorn, Director and Curator, Zillman Art Museum, University of Maine, Jackie Terrassa, Carolyn Mussey, Director, Colby College Museum of Art, and Dan Mills, Director, Bates College Museum of Art. Before we begin, we'd like to acknowledge that the Portland Museum of Art occupies land in the land of the dawn that was and still is inhabited by the Wabanaki peoples, including the Abenaki, Maliseet, Micmac, Passamaquoddy, and Penobscot nations in what is known today as Maine. Thank you all panelists and all the folks at home for watching here tonight. If you have any questions during the process or during the panel, please put them in the Q&A and we'll get to them near the end of the program. I'd like to start with a question for each of the directors, beginning with Chris at the Farnsworth. Chris, is there an artist or an artwork that you've admired from this year and why?
Well, thanks, Mark, and certainly thanks to my colleagues on the screen tonight in tonight's panel. You'll see it here in a minute. There it is, this wonderful piece. So just to sort of set the stage for this particular object. So this, of course, is a Marguerite Zorak wonderful hooked rug. And it really plays into sort of the larger conversation. This year, one of our exhibitions is Women of Vision, celebrating 13 remarkable women that have made significant contributions to Maine's role in American art. And as you know, and can appreciate that many women throughout their careers were sort of marginalized and really left out of the larger art historical narrative. And this is Marguerite Zorak that, as I said, is just this beautiful hooked rug. It was created in 1917, so you can imagine it's 140 years old and it's in remarkable condition. It's titled Eden, and it was really based on a painting that she did earlier in her career. Many people know about her husband, William Zorak, one of the great modernist sculptors of the 20th century, but again, overshadowed. And, you know, it was our opportunity here at the museum to celebrate not only Marguerite, but these other 12 women who over the course of their careers made significant contributions, but maybe were certainly forgotten in the history and the context of Maine and American art. So I certainly want to highlight that. And again, thanks for the opportunity. George, I think you are next.
Hey, George, just checking in to see if you can hear us.
Yes, can you hear me now? Okay.
We can hear you now. Thanks, George. Gotcha.
Okay, great. Sorry. I just want to share, I'm very enthusiastic about the French-American artist John Bailey and his captivating painting that you see that's titled Cabeza de Vaca. It's a very recent museum acquisition. It'll go on display for the first time at the museum in August and was made possible the gift through two Miami-based contemporary art collectors. Cabeza de Vaca, it spans 6 by 8 feet. It's named after the Spanish explorer, sailor, and the 1927 expedition. It is wonderful in that it offers so much information for the viewer to contemplate and explore in the work. It's characteristic of John Bailey's other paintings in that he layers an array of imagery, historical sites, world events, maps, figures. And in this particular painting, he has layered and painted hundreds of hands that create this kind of web-like layer in the composition. And also you'll see included in the works on the lower portion is the depiction of two globes. One reflects how humans conceptualized the earth prior to Columbus's trips, and the others how perception has changed as the Western Hemisphere appeared. And the other thing I want to say about John Bailey, that my admiration for that work is very timely now with the current state of affairs in our country. He recently created a wonderful painting, a very powerful painting that is based on the January 6th attack on the US Capitol. And this horrific event provided fuel and imagery for this new work. So it's an artist that is doing some really incredible things. So we're very fortunate to have this new work in our collection and 4 additional smaller works on paper. So thanks very much.
Hi, everybody. I've been thinking about the work of Anne Millet. We had her speak virtually a couple weeks ago at the museum. And this particular artwork is one that just really has stayed with me, and I have ended up using it in a number of different conversations around, what we impose on people as we look at them, and as we look at people that we really don't know and the assumptions that we make. And so this is a work that she made a number of years ago. She had requested permission to be an embedded photographer during the Iraq War, but was not granted that, but was granted permission to photograph military personnel in training in 29 Palms in California. And the way that I've ended up using this artwork in conversation is around questions of equity and racial justice, in terms of imagining kind of what are the stories that we might, assume of this person, and then thinking about what of that relates to this person's perceived, the identity we perceive this person to be. And what if that identity was different? And what is our relationship also in a year such as we've had, from insurrections in the Capitol to violence in terms of, as a result of the mass availability of weapons? What's our relationship to questions of national security, and where, in fact, national security lies or not? Who can be safe? How is safety established? And at the same time, questions of violence because of the way in which this person is holding these weapons. And so what I've experienced is that the response to this artwork really depends a lot on people's personal experiences, just anything ranging from experiences with the military, experiences with guns, experiences with having people perhaps of this person's age or identity in their lives, and how we all respond so differently to what looks like a very, very simple artwork, a very simple photograph. So I find her work to be incredibly powerful in not really providing a point of view in terms of how one should think about the subject, but really opening a wealth of questions, which I think is what is so powerful about art in terms of humanizing. And certainly on the anniversary of George Floyd's death, that is, I think, one of the most important things that artworks can do, is humanize. Thank you.
Dan Mills here from Bates. Thinking about artists who I may admire in this past year and why. I think generally I would say first, all the artists who've continued to make during these challenging times and times of hardship. But one in particular comes to mind, someone I've known a long time, Brad Kohlheimer, a remarkable artist, born to Native American parents, adopted as an infant to a German immigrant family. Brad talks about the first place, the life that he's lived. The second place, the life he would have had he been raised on a reservation in the Southwest. And the third, kind of a combination of these realities. And from this, in the words of critic Susan Harris, he has evolved a personal, vibrant, and expressionist version of the American experience that is a mix of styles, codes, and cultural references that are equal parts autobiography and imagination. Brad was a New York artist for years and lives in New York and spends time in Arizona, where he ended up pretty much staying completely during the pandemic. This is taken there. And he's widely recognized for this work in the art world and has been seen, I tease him that he's seen as an elder increasingly to younger underground and emerging Native artists. And recently he's begun to devote time to a project that focuses on their work. And so I'm going to take this moment to share something publicly for the first time, which is that Brett and I have been working on a project over the pandemic that we're calling Exploding Native Inevitable. And it's an exhibition of emerging and underground Native artists that'll extend out into performance, screenings, and music. And in Brad's words, it's a forthcoming foundational culture eruption, overdue and unavoidable. It's a ways out. We've got a lot to do. It's going to happen in 2023, and there'll be a companion exhibition of Brad's work, including works that are already in our collection. That'll be part of it. And thanks everyone, and what a great group Maine directors and Maine museums are. So thanks, nice to be part of this.
Thanks, everybody. I really appreciate that. It was really moving to hear about all these works that you're looking at and sharing with us. What I'd like to do now is head into some of our questions, and maybe I'll start with George. If you don't mind, I'm going to throw one at you first. What issues or ideas do you feel museums must transform in order to remain relevant cultural spaces for their communities?
I think we need to involve an array of different voices to fully explore the important role that museums can play in addressing social and diversity issues. In addition to that, and related to that, we must also shift the way in which we interact with and consider the need of our younger audiences. So, for instance, in a 2017 study by Museum Next, it revealed that for audiences that were age 30 and younger, that 44% believes that a museum that speaks about social issues that is much more relevant to them. So it's something that we definitely consider and should consider sooner than later, and involve different voices in that discussion on how we take on these issues as institutions.
Thank you, George. I really appreciate that. And I think that sets a nice tenor for our conversation. Jackie, I might throw one at you, and you being, maybe tell us a little bit about just arriving in Maine and being under COVID conditions and starting as the great new director at Colby. We're so excited to have you here. This is kind of I don't know if this is helpful this year for you, but what have you learned or what have you learned or continue to learn as a director of a museum in this time?
I am learning so much. I'm learning so much. First of all, this is my first museum directorship. So that alone is, I have a lot to learn. I think one of the things that I continually find myself thinking about is the question of leadership as it relates to recognizing, recognizing the state in which we are, that we've been, that we as a people, including my staff, myself, have been undergoing a tremendous amount of change, of upheaval, of transformation, of demand. And then at the same time, I'm a new director, and also there are great ambitions and ideas moving forward, and how to I find myself thinking about how to lead with compassion and with ambition, and what the relationship between those two things are. And most of all, how to lead with imagination and in a way that inspires people forward, in a way that also feels healing, that it doesn't feel like imposing more on people who have given a lot already. So I'm thinking a lot about those questions of leadership and how do we move forward. And I also wanted to just echo what George just said in terms of involving a wide array of people and redefining our institutions. And I would say that for me, it's a matter of point of view. That's the other thing that I keep thinking about, that it's not just the content that we present, it's the point of view that we bring towards the work and whose expertise counts in shaping those points of view. So that's another thing I've been thinking about.
Thank you, Jackie. Just a little bit of follow-up on that. Do you arrived, pre kind of COVID, and then COVID came, and you talked about like becoming a director. Have things shifted what you imagined you'd be doing, and then suddenly you arrived and you had to have a whole new set of variables to work with? How have you transitioned?
When I first became aware of the job, it was already COVID. And I would say I probably would not be in Maine if it had not been for the fact that we were in a pandemic. And because it made me re-examine a lot of things. And it also it had already been 2 months since I had not had the wealth of, nightly activity maybe that I was accustomed to. And so I realized that I could be in a different kind of place, and that possibly a different kind of place, in fact, would be a great benefit. There's still plenty of activity.
Well, we're very thankful to have you.
I just had no idea what it would be to actually, be here. So.
Well, we're lucky to have you. So thank you. We look forward to your work in years ahead. So I'm going to ask Dan a question. You ready, Dan? What qualities must exist in order to, quote unquote, feel at home? How can those ideas translate into a museum, that notion of home, which is kind of way in which we've encapsulated this series of lectures? Thinking about home and museum, can you share your thoughts a little bit?
Thank you, Mark. Gosh, pretty wide open. I guess I think about it in a few ways. I'll talk about, I guess first certain maybe kind of philosophies I have about, doing this job, and then tether it to that, which is, I've made my career really directing small academic museums, and my philosophy and aspiration has been to really organize an amazing exhibition program of art from all cultures around the world that would be wonderful anywhere, but have it be where I am and in that institution and community. And at the same time, to then present the work in the way that we can and do, which is welcoming to all, whether it's someone who's highly knowledgeable about art, to a first-time museum visitor, to children and people of all backgrounds, and have them feel at home with the experience of being surrounded by extraordinary art, having contact with remarkable artists, and having the direct experience with art.
Thank you, Dan. I appreciate that. It's that notion of home was a nice way to encapsulate these conversations, and thinking about how we all define home differently, and how can a museum be, amenable, thoughtful, and provocative about notions of home for everybody, not just a single set of people, which I think we probably have done to a certain amount in the past. Chris, what have you learned from communities that have informed your work? So again, You know, what have you learned from your community or communities that have informed your work as a director?
You know, it's interesting conversation, and the responses, to some degree, it's sort of a combination of some of the answers that I think have already been made. I think that, you know, here in Rockland, it's an interesting situation, interesting dynamic. We have a school system and a population in the immediate Rockland area that is, you know, has some serious issues, and you know, we sort of jump in with looking at, you know, how do we support those communities? Just to give you an idea, 80% of our school population qualify for free or reduced lunch programs. And, you know, I think that that's, you know, plays a key role in thinking about, you know, what is our role, and what do we learn from the communities. We also, as you know, have a national and international audience that comes into the area, you know, throughout the course of the year. So, you know, this past year it's been an opportunity for us to sort of think more deeply, think about ways we engage, thinking about, you know, opportunities to take on some of these significant issues, the issues that we've all been confronted with this past year, not only the pandemic, but sort of the social unrest and the racial inequities, and trying to sort of figure out, you know, what's our role, what's our responsibility as an institution, what's our obligation. And I think, you know, like many museums, I think you know, the museum model is shifting and it's changing, and it's trying to figure out that, you know, historically museums would mount these great exhibitions, put them on the walls, open the doors, and anybody that wanted to see them was more than welcome to come in. But I think, you know, nowadays, I think, you know, the paradigm shift. It's, you know, I think museums have to take on greater responsibility. They play a key role in sort of the cultural and the economic fabric of the communities they serve. And they also take on, I think they should, you know, take on a more significant social role and obligation. And so, you know, I think that, as I said, we all serve many communities. And I think that what we've done this past year is really think, listen, have a lot of conversations, and making sure that, you know, our institution, as well as, I know, all of you, you know, getting back to that issue of relevance, making sure that we have those connections. We can do the greatest programs. We can put the, you know, most important exhibitions on the walls, but if we don't have an audience, it really, what's the point? So again, I think that what we're doing here is really looking and listening very carefully and figuring out, you know, our next steps to make sure that our relevance remains strong.
Great, thanks, Chris. I really appreciate it. We got, you guys, there's so many good topics of conversation. We go from any and all of your answers, but I'm gonna maybe throw one to everybody and see if someone wants to kind of catch this one. How has the history of your organization informed how history of your organization informed your? Anybody want to raise a hand or come up in there? I know it's a hard one.
Mark, if you could just repeat that question. We lost you on the.
Sorry, Chris. Sorry about that. I'm going to try it again. How has the history of your organization informed your approach to future challenges? Did that come through okay?
Yep, we heard it.
Hey, Jackie, go ahead. Thank you. Thanks, Chris.
Yeah, I'm happy to get us started. I am fascinated by how the Colby Museum, which was is not a very old museum compared to other museums, but how it's been formed by a combination of community members who cared about the community, meaning both Colby, but the broader community of Waterville and where they were, and its education and just enrichment, and also by living artists. And the combination of those two things has been powerful. And I keep thinking that those two things are really critical. We are a liberal arts college, and yet we are in a very specific place. And so how can we continue to cultivate that responsiveness to the place where we are and the people who really care about those assets that are in that place. And then how can we continue to listen to artists and what they're making and how they're thinking and where they might take us. And so that is very much informing how I think about the future of the museum. It's one of the reasons why I'm so excited, for instance, to have something like the Lauder Institute that allows us to bring a wide range of artists into the campus and to our community.
Go for it, George. Thank you. Thank you, Jackie.
Well, I'll just say, being at a state university museum, I mean, often museums kind of have very informal, sometimes humble beginnings. So for our museum, it's an issue of growth. And with the move downtown from campus to downtown Bangor 20 years ago, with a rather, at the time, a small footprint to where we are presently, even in the middle of the pandemic, with our recent Zillman gift of thoughtfully expanding, that kind of coincides with the growth of downtown Bangor. So, we're really pleased that in August or September, the dates are a little bit loose at this point, but we will be opening our 5 new galleries. So, as the city has grown and as our visitation has grown, we are now able to provide some more space for our changing exhibitions and our collections and things like that. So we wouldn't be able to do it without, supporters, of course. So that gift was transformational in our work and in moving our history forward as an institution.
Mark, if I certainly can jump in,
Please do.
The Farnsworth. So I think the thing that's pretty remarkable here, and again, as I said, this year we're celebrating what we call Women of Vision in an exhibition. And one of those is Lucy Farnsworth, who, founded the museum in 1935. So think about it, 1935, thinking about museums being founded at that point, not many by women. And we constantly go back and we constantly point and look at sort of Lucy's estate plans and certainly her will, which certainly have informed a lot of our conversations. As said, she was interested in providing this sort of transformative opportunity for the community, both as an economic engine, but more importantly, as a cultural institution in Rockland, of a city of 7,000 people. I would say that's incredibly visionary. And just recently, we started out on a 25-year master plan called the Centennial Plan. And periodically, we would go back and look at Lucy's thoughts and her vision and her aspirations, making sure that they were considered moving forward as we both marry our aspirations, our program aspirations, with sort of the built campus. So it's not far from our mind that the person that started the institution still, so to speak, has a voice in sort of our future decision making.
Thank you all. That's it's interesting. We're all very close to each other. But we all have very different origin stories. Museums are amazing. As you all know, how similar we are and how totally different we are. But I do think, in a lot of ways, listening to you all tonight, it sounds like the path forward is pretty similar to many of us here. So, is there a thought you might have, in your all's opinions, what does a museum field need to do now to change, to move forward? We've learned, we've been listening, we have a lot more listening to do. Are there some specific ideas or things you think museums need to learn from this moment to move forward?
I'll jump in. I sort of have almost some bullet point type thoughts. And, first is to recognize that, our institutions, even though we're all art museums, are relatively different from one another. And I think it's a bit of a challenge when we think of museums the way our national organization does, A to Z, arboretums to zoos. It's hard to have a single, solution. But I think some thoughts are spending time living in the future. I mean, kind of mentally as an institution in your community, with your culture, recognizing that we can always do better, individually and as institutions. And, I'd say that I doubt that, honestly, there's probably any museums that can say they had a kind of a disaster plan in place for a pandemic. Show of hands, anybody have one? Yeah, probably not. So we learned some things from that, but then I'd say let's consider other things that have happened in this last year plus, which recent cultural movements to really meaningfully address inclusion, diversity, equity, accessibility issues, which it's not that they weren't there. Okay, so unless we were already working on plans to address these things, I think some institutions more than others were perhaps caught a bit flat-footed, and even those that were doing the work, no doubt, could listen more and be open and willing to do the work and do better. That's my list.
Anybody else want to chime in on things you're thinking about moving the field forward?
One of the things that I'm thinking about is, and this has been on my mind for some time before coming to Colby, is that we would do well as a field to change our metrics from one that is so focused on products and celebrating, it's great. I mean, we do it at Colby. We celebrate our acquisitions, it's absolutely important to the future of museums. We celebrate our exhibitions, of course. We celebrate publications, all of that. But how can we also celebrate and not quantify in the same terms, but value the relationship building that actually we all need to be doing? And for instance, how can we strengthen the capacity of all of our staff in the area of community engagement, in addition to increasing our staff in the area of community engagement? Because if we say that we need to listen to our communities more, that actually takes expertise, relationship, time. And yet it's one of the hardest things to quantify, because where does that show up? How does it manifest? It sometimes manifests years later because something was able to happen because somebody started building that relationship 5 years ago. And so I think that is one fundamental thing that I'd like to see us change as a field.
I would certainly second and third that, Jackie. I mean, I know even at the PMA, we've been talking about it. We've not done enough, and we haven't gone far enough. And I've been reading a lot about SROI, which is the social return on investment, and also agree that most museums are tracking numbers that are more about running a business than about meeting a mission. And so the numbers don't meet the mission. They might make us look financially solvent and have people coming, but who's coming and who's not coming, and what's our content? So I totally agree with you. We've been trying to delve into the idea of, is there a way to find impact metrics, and particularly on the education and long-term relationships, which, I mean, we all are strong museums, but there's never enough money to do the evaluations. But I feel like it's time to set aside as much money for evaluations and respond and trying to understand our impact as we do on content. And so that kind of leads me to the other conversation that I think is happening out there is, decision-making models around who gets to decide on content, who sits at the boardroom. I think for our institution, at least the PMA, having been complicit in the past to some structures we're not particularly proud of. How do we understand and move forward to have more people at the table from diverse and inclusive backgrounds to make choices so the power is shared and not so homogenous, particularly in a state that is demographically challenged? I know that's really a statement than a question, so I apologize. I don't know if anybody else wants to take that thought or think about metrics that you're thinking about that could be helpful. Or if anybody out there, let's go ahead, George, you want to start, Bray?
I mean, this is really more on content related to, as we look at collections and we look at growing collections and having a greater representation of artists from varied cultural backgrounds and represented in our collection. And it does tie in solely to kind of firming up that mission and really developing relationships with donors and others that will help us join us in realizing the need for that as we look at our collections and helping us down that path as we seek to kind of grow collections in a very thoughtful and inclusive way.
Anybody else want to follow up on that, or I could hop into the Q&A for a second? All right, so I'm going to take a look at the Q&A. One person is very thankful. It's up for particularly for people who live so far away from all of us here at these museums. And the one benefit of COVID, this person is suggesting, is the fact that we can get together on Zoom, and there is a blessing moving forward that more of us can gather, even if we can't be in person, though we'd like to be in person. It's nice to have folks who love Maine and the museums of Maine be able to participate where they wouldn't normally could, which I think we all absolutely agree. Another question is, where are the other Maine art museums in this conversation? Great question. We've had a few panels. This is our fourth. So our some of our other directors, Chris Newell and Amanda and Jen and Ann and Frank, are from Bowdoin, Monhegan, Ogunquit, and the Abbey Museum. We're on another panel earlier. So throughout the springtime, we've had a series of panels with all the directors at one time, but we've been limiting to about 4 or 5 at one time. So I've talked a lot. Do any of you directors want to bring anything up that we haven't talked about, or ask any of us questions that you have you'd like to share with each other or with our audience?
I would love to hear how some of my colleagues are thinking about experience in the museum as we begin to reopen, or as you've reopened, as we think about the possibility of actual in-person programming in addition to possibly continuing virtual. So I'd love for us to talk a little bit about that, because we're in a new day.
Yeah, it's a great question, Jackie. You know, I think it's one that we're all, you know, discussing in a very serious way at this point. I mean, you know, this kind of relates to the bigger conversation I think we are having today, as far as the relevance that, and to Mark's point with the one comment that somebody posted regarding, you know, the opportunity to have access, even though if we're not in a bricks and mortar sort of experience, or they can't participate because they have to travel so far. So, you know, I think one of the things we've been looking at is, you know, I think what I describe as the hybrid model of the museum experience. So, you know, March 16th or 15th of 19, we all hunkered down and we really had to transform sort of our bricks and mortar experience to one that fit in the palm of our hand, a virtual experience. And, you know, we all figured out how to adapt, and we figured very quickly how to do that. And I think the silver lining was we realized, to the point made just now, that you know, a lot of individuals and a lot of institutions were able to engage larger audiences than we have in the past. But I think moving forward, I think it will be a hybrid model. I think that, you know, what we're trying to figure out is, you know, is there the ability to continue? And certainly there's nothing that replaces the in-person experience, particularly when you're viewing art. But at the same time, you know, if we're truly fulfilling our missions, that I think that the hybrid model, both in person and virtual, is going to be a key piece moving forward. And I love to say we have the answer. We don't. We're still thinking about it. We're still trying to figure that out. But I think it's here to stay. I think people have developed the muscle memory with the expectation that you know, those institutions that are basically nimble to be able to react and be able to engage audiences in multiple forms, I think are going to be ahead of the curve. So I'd be curious if anybody else, any of our other colleagues have given that some thought too.
Yeah, thanks. Good question, Jackie, and good thoughts. Chris, I have a feeling that this year we've had a little more time to plan for it than the abrupt shift we had last March. But nonetheless, I have a feeling that we'll be learning as we go. One of the things that we've been thinking about is, yeah, it's amazing that we've had people from Europe and Australia attend our programming. And for all we know, someone who's in their jammies at their kitchen table down the street, who you know, didn't have to come in and see us in person. So we reached people who, for various reasons, weren't able to be here. But so as we move to live in-person programming, and we do both, are we privileging the in-person and documenting? Can we make both of those platforms be equally good? Do we, if we make the wrong decisions, do we sort of make the live part of it secondary to documenting it for people who aren't here? I mean, I don't think that will be the objective, but I think those are the kinds of things we have to think about. Not every public program that we hold live can also be a kind of perfectly produced virtual experience simultaneously. And so we're I think honestly thinking of how do we document well our live programs, not make Zoom programs that people can be part of in person. We'll let you know next year.
Thanks, Dan. Well, and that adds to some, there is a couple of other questions in the chat about, do you have plans to use a Zoom type platform to reach out to those of us who can no longer travel to museums in person? I think you answered it both, everybody. That is definitely something we're all figuring out, but we see that happening. I know for the PMA, for our summer show, because we're not gathering together, we have a model where 2 curators are going to be in the galleries talking to each other in a chat that's going to be online instead of being in person. And I think, Dan, you've got the point. How do you do both so we don't privilege one accessibility over another? And how do we move forward to be as inclusive as we possibly can with the resources we have to be sure that folks who can't get to the museums still have these same opportunities? Because the worst thing is to raise expectations and then not meet them later when people get excited about these opportunities. Well, I'm going to pop down another question we've got here, actually coming from our fellow director, Frank Goodyear from Bowdoin. And Frank is asking us, local artists are a key constituency for museums. What are new ways of engaging with artists in our communities? Anybody want to take that?
I've talked a lot, but I'll offer a couple of thoughts. One is I think local artists belong on our boards. And so bringing local artists into our museums, in addition to then in terms of the community, involving local artists and co-creating programs with communities in ways that are both responsive to their own interests as practitioners and very much processes of listening with communities. So many artists, some of the best artists working today work in communities. And I think in the past, the distinction between those who worked in communities and those who did not was much more strict. And that's, I feel, increasingly not the case. So I think that is something, both of those things I think are solutions.
All right, thanks everybody. I'm going to hop down to another question. Questions are starting to roll in. This is from a very good friend of many of us here in Maine, Lisa Marin. And Lisa's question is, hybrid model will offer great opportunities for K-12 students to visit museums more often and offer some extra time to explore content. And what I like to do is just talk to you all. I know that it's been a really tough year since we all serve our communities, and particularly our young people, but kids in school has been really tough. Are there things you're thinking about as we head into, probably next fall, being sure that we're serving K-12 students as well as we can? Hey, George, go ahead.
I'll just say that, along with, the very quick, we had to react very quickly and learn the virtual programming, both for programming appropriate for adults, like virtual tours and things like that. But as well, we did a whole series at the Zillman of basically hands-on art activities that were led by an educator and that parents could replicate at home with materials and things like that. But I totally agree that our ability to engage with K through 12 more frequently than what has been the standard museum visit and tour, this has enabled us to kind of stick our toe in the water and really explore what might be possible in enhancing those programs in between those very valuable face-to-face visits, experiencing original works of art. Now, I'm really firm believer that, you know, experiencing original works of art, I think we all are, face-to-face is important, and we will continue that, of course, as museums. But as Chris mentioned, hybrid model now, given its success that we have and the feedback we've gotten from people, we have to find a way to more kind of robustly incorporate that into our normal programming. And that, I think we're all figuring out, because it requires resources and expertise and in producing quality products that are you know, produced well. So so that I do think Lisa Marin is right. We should, that is another mechanism to reach our K through 12 audiences. Thanks.
And if I can certainly just jump in and just a quick footnote to George's thoughts. You know, we have a fairly significant and substantial in the classroom program here called Arts and Education, and you know, we serve multiple schools. We have educators in the classroom, and then COVID hit, and then we certainly had to pull, you know, our educators out of the classroom, and we had to think very quickly as to, you know, how do we deliver that content? Just like we're thinking about how do we deliver our content to our audiences, we had to think about it, how do we do that with schools? And you know, we're fortunate we you know, figured that out, and I think it seems to be working well, and that's, again, developing the green screen studios, delivering that content. And I think that, you know, the big question that we have is sort of the timing of when we can develop that sort of hybrid model, meaning not only, yes, we will continue to deliver, you know, our digital content, but also at the same time hopeful that schools at some point in the not too distant future will feel comfortable of bringing their students back in to the museum setting, or more simply, just when they're going to feel comfortable taking their kids out of the school. And as you know, I think that the question that we really been trying to work with the administrators here, and I think the honest truth is they don't quite know, you know, when that's going to happen. Because right now, as many of the school districts, either they're in person or there is an in person with also remote opportunities. And moving forward, you know, what does the school model look like? And I think that you know, that one size fits all program that we had in the past, we may have to think differently. But fundamentally, I would agree with the person that posed the question, and that is that. Yes, I mean, I think it's our obligation as institutions to assist the schools to broaden kids' opportunities. Many of the schools here in Maine are pressed financially. And as I said, I think that if we really serve our communities well and fulfill our missions, the schools are a key piece of our audience base. And we really need to dedicate the time and resources to make sure that that happens.
Okay, I'll jump in also as you know, we were in a pretty good place at Bates in that we have a couple of digital platforms that exist that are improved by in-person visits to the museum for our K through 12 students. We have a program called 1,000 Words Project Online, and we launched during the pandemic, very coincidentally, Steam Power, which is modeled after the 1,000 Words Project, which really uses art as a subject matter for language classes. And of course, Steam Power is for science, technology, and engineering. But we also had to learn how to be nimble because, you know, with no warning, we had no ability to have our local students come. And I think like all of us, we had to figure some things out. So here last year, we had an Ashley Bryan exhibition, one of the great children's book authors and illustrators, and who wasn't allowed to come see it in person? Children. So, we explored and did the virtual exhibition and worked with Indigo Arts Alliance to get publications into into over 140 classrooms to bring Ashley into their lives. But I don't think we can, in the future, we'll be able to plan for such things. We won't be doing it by the seat of our pants with little notice as a desperate act to make sure that we're serving the students who we want to off campus. But I think we also learned a great deal about what's possible. And I think some of that's going to carry forward in ways we're still going to be discovering.
Great, thanks everybody. That's a great answer. And as you guys, I think the audience can tell, it's something we're all thinking about, having really lost a year of in-person experiences with young people K through 12, and we've all worked hard to do as best we can on Zoom, but we've all been on Zoom a lot, and eventually, we have to find different ways of doing it in some of these hybrid models. One question that relates to that, that's something I know the PMA is thinking about, is, are any of us thinking organizationally about community partnerships or collaborations as a response in this moment? Are we thinking more about community partnerships and collaborations with other organizations in our communities that we haven't previously worked with?
One of the things that happened this year at Colby was that we strengthened community partnerships that were there, for instance, with Waterville Creates and the Public Library and others. But through that partnership and through the distribution of kits in our community, we've created together as a community group new partnerships with social service organizations and others that are ensuring that those materials are actually reaching families that might not otherwise have access to them. And I think that collaboration with the social sector of museums and the social sector, there's a lot more to be developed there, and something that we want to strengthen in the future. Going back to the K through 12 environment, I think one of the aspects that the K through 12 environment benefits from, particularly I'm thinking about teachers, is that oftentimes teachers might be experiencing things in a very isolated ways. And I think one of the things that the virtual environment can allow is for a much larger community, for museums to play a role in actually being partners to communities of teachers and bringing teachers together to be resources for each other in larger ways than, say, school by school or classroom by classroom. And so I think that at what level do we partner and with what networks, as opposed to only, individuals or organizations or individual schools.
Thank you both. Anybody else on? I think it's really interesting. I think there's a lot of work being done here, and I appreciate you all talking about those partnerships and the community collaborations moving forward. And it's interesting to hear you say, Jackie, I think, right, instead of thinking about individual classrooms as a classroom group coming, how do we think about larger groups or different groups of people, not as specifically a classroom arriving with their teacher? That experience may need some serious adjustments and when people come. Chris, exactly. Did I interrupt? Did you want to jump in?
No, I appreciate what Jackie has to say, and I certainly agree. I think that, for us, it sort of goes back to that issue of relevance. If we're, it's everything we learned and everything we endured this past year, we as an institution, are thinking more broadly about our partners. Of course, you as the Museum Trail are sort of partners, our cultural partners within the communities we serve. But, if we're, truly fulfilling our mission, or walk the walk and talk the talk, I think that, we really need to be thinking about, what is our social obligations, what are our obligations beyond, the obvious partners. And we've been giving a lot of thought, about that. We actually just teamed up with the food pantry here called AIO with a really interesting project, a mural project. We also work or starting the conversations with other, groups that are doing really important work, whether it be homeless or whether it be, homes that are sort of unsafe for the kids. to a program that's come in town, which is doing really remarkable work called Out Maine, which really works with kids in sort of, really developing and making sure that the kids have the ability to have a voice as they sort of explore their identity. So, I think that we're really thinking more broadly than we as an institution have done in the past. And I think we're going to continue down that path. I think there's some wonderful, creative, dynamic partnerships that can really, come out of those conversations. So that's, I think, something, that we're thinking a lot about at this point.
Great, thanks everybody. I got a couple more questions I'm going to kind of get to as we kind of get to the end, and maybe at the last minute, each of you all can tell everybody what's up at your museum when you're about to open, so everybody knows to come visit. But I'm going to try to throw a couple of quick questions before we get to that at the end. What are some ways that museums can expand their visitor base? What events can encourage a wide range of museum attendees? Anybody want to take that?
For me, it goes back to partnerships and community engagement. One type of approach is opening our doors, making the invitation, making things as accessible as possible, and still the people who are most likely to show up are likely going to be people who already were inclined or curious, and maybe some others. I think that if we begin with an invitation that starts where people are at and with partners that are already more familiar and trusted by people who are not coming, that creates more of a kind of connection and a sense of relevance that then allows somebody to consider that museum might actually have something to offer them. So I think that is one strategy is through partnerships with not the usual suspects in making those connections.
Go ahead, George. Thanks. Thanks, Jackie.
Yeah, I agree with Jackie there. I think also with our aim of kind of cultivating younger audience as well, often kind of an entry point to that is partnering with organizations that younger professionals are involved with, like Green Drinks and things like that. I don't know if you're aware of that. That has an environmental message too, but it as well as social. So we have partnered with that has brought in younger professional audiences to the museum. Those who have not attended the museum before are not familiar with our program. And we found that through that, they started coming to the museum and engaging in other programs. So I agree that those ways of reaching out to not the usual visitor through events and other programs as an entry point is very important as we kind of grow our audiences.
Thanks so much, George. Well, we're coming near to the end, and there's some other great questions. I apologize to anybody who posted a question in the chat. I'm afraid we're running out of time. And if you would like to contact any of us for the Maine Art Museum Trail, please do, and we'll be sure to answer your questions. So I apologize for that. But as we head off, what I'd like to do is ask each of our directors to give a quick blurb on what's up and what we can come see and when we can come see it at your museum. George, do you want to go first?
Sure, thank you. Well, we now, thankfully, we are fully open at our regular capacity for visitors. We have our current shows on display through the end of June, and then we will be transitioning to our new exhibitions, which will open on August 17th. And we're very excited about those. Those exhibitions will run until the end of December. Sydney, we have basically 5 new shows that we will open. So I won't go through all, they're all on the website. But I will say that our new galleries, we are hoping to open mid-September. And we will have a selection of works from the permanent collection on display there. So also just kind of in closing, want to mention how great it is to be in Maine with a wonderful collaborative and supportive group of museum directors. Trust me, it doesn't happen in every state. So we're very lucky to have a great group of colleagues and the Maine Art Museum Trail. So So very glad to be part of this tonight. Thank you so much.
Thanks, George. Dan, you want to give us some what's happening at Bates?
Thank you. Yes, we open for the public on June 11th, 2 exhibitions. Joseph Delaney, Taking Notice. Delaney, who lived from 1904 to 91, is African-American brother and younger brother to Buford Delaney, 2 artists who in various ways were largely recognized but not celebrated during their lives. And this will be the first exhibition of his in New England. And we'll have a group exhibition called Carl Benton Straub, His Enduring Legacy, a long beloved professor and dean who left us his collection that really is about place and wilderness. And then I'll throw in, because the last 2 days of summer, we'll open Marsden Hartley, an exhibition with the Vilcek Foundation. That is Marsden Hartley Adventurer in the Arts, an exhibition we're extremely excited about, and there'll be some paintings that have never been seen in the US from his Berlin series on view first here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dan. That sounds amazing. Chris, what's up at the Farnsworth?
All systems go. We have 5 new exhibitions, and encourage everybody to look at the website. And as I said, it's an exciting lineup, and campus looks great. And as I said, we are open and welcome your visit. So look forward to it. And again, thanks again. Would certainly reinforce George's comments. It's a great group of people, very collegial atmosphere here in Maine, and really it's great for all of us to be part of the Maine Museum Trail. So thanks for participating tonight.
Great, thanks, Chris. And Jackie, what's up at Colby?
Well, I want to echo the thanks to this group, to the Maine Art Museum Trail, and to all the people who have joined us for these talks. It's really great to see that level of participation. And I am thrilled that we will be opening our doors wide on June 4 for the final weekend of our Roy Lichtenstein exhibition, Early Years, nothing like anybody has ever truly seen of his work. Or most people, I should say. And then a couple of weeks later, we open an exhibition of beautiful prints by Mary Cassatt, showing her truly experimenting with the medium of printmaking. And then in July 17, we open a major exhibition of the work of Bob Thompson, an artist who lived too short a life and was active in the late 50s and early 60s, and is going to be, I think, a revelation for many people. So I'm thrilled. And of course, our permanent collection and some new acquisitions.
Great, thank you, Jackie, and thanks everybody. And just so everybody knows, at the PMA, we'll be opening the David Driscoll Show on June 19th, who is an American, international, and Maine hero. So hope you all get a chance to come to the PMA as well. But again, thanks to our audience and all of you for this series. We're going to come back next year. We're not quite sure what our theme's going to be, but it's been so successful. Looks like we had over 100 people here tonight listening to us. I want to thank our visitors to all the museums and thank everybody for coming out tonight. And we look forward to seeing you in the museum soon. Thanks to the panelists and thanks to all of our members and guests. Good night, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.